Okay.
You're good.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
The crowd goes wild.
Keep them quiet.
And good evening to the web audience. And in some ways we can say it's a new year, so Happy New Year. Not like Rosh Hashanah, the conventional Rosh Hashanah, but the beginning of the so-called miraculous cycle, the beginning of the monthly cycle. Chodesh, Chidush, the beginning of renewal, begins in the month of Nisan, the month of Passover, when Chedesh Hazel Lachem, which is declared to be, this is the month, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashanah. This is the beginning, the months of the year. So it's also a first. And as I've discussed here many times and elaborated in many of the holy books by our sages, the difference between this Rosh Hashanah, so to speak, the Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashanah, and Rosh Hashanah that we celebrate, what we call the Hebrew New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and then coming Yom Kippur, the high holidays, is that, as the verse says, this is Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashanah. This is the first and the beginning of your months of the year, the lunar cycle of the months. And Rosh Hashanah, as the name implies, is Rosh Hashanah, is the beginning of the year, the solar cycle. Shana as in solar, and Chodesh as in month. As we know that the months of the year are determined by the lunar cycle, and the solar cycle has actually no months. Nothing happens on the 30th or the 31st of a month. Like today's April 30th. Nothing happens in any physical sense of the word. These are just a man-made, invisible structure that we should some way have a master be able to divide the solar year into 12 months. On the other hand, at the end of an annual cycle, of a solar cycle, something does happen in the solar orbit and its relationship with Earth. And the moon, there is no Shana. A moon really doesn't have nothing happens at the end of 12 months. So as the Even Ezra writes, that the Levana ein Shana and the Shechama ein Chodesh, which means the sun doesn't have months and the moon doesn't have years. However, in the Jewish calendar, in the Hebrew calendar, as established by Hillel and by the sages of old, they established that the Hebrew calendar be one where we reconcile, in a way, a synthesis between the solar and the lunar cycles, which is connected to the leap year, which I've discussed. I don't want to go into it right here. This year is a leap year, an extra month, in order to reconcile between the discrepancy, the 11 days that distinguishes between a lunar year, 12 months and of a lunar cycle, as opposed to 12 months of a solar cycle. But what I want to address here is the difference in Chodesh and Shana. Is the word Shana also comes from the word change, shinui, changes. The word Chodesh comes from the word renewal, Chodesh, as in the renewal of the moon. So a Levana Chadasha, Kiddush HaChodesh, we celebrate, we sanctify the renewal. And in many ways, this month of Nisan, when we celebrate Passover, when the Jews left Egypt 3,320 years ago, is a celebration of renewal. What happened when they left Egypt? Mitzrayim, they left the constraints, they experienced renewal. It became a new nation, born out of the pains and out of the birth pangs and the pain and the suffering of the Egyptian oppression. As Yecheskel, as the prophet writes, that compares the Jews leaving Egypt to the birth of a child. The birth of a child, when a child emerges from its mother's womb, is bloody, there's pain, the birth pains that the mother endures, birth pangs, and very much in very same way, the Jewish people, in a collective sense, it was the birth of the Jewish nation. So the collective birthday of the Jewish people happens on Passover, in this month of Nisan, essentially Chodesh, renewal. The month of Rosh Hashanah is not about the birth of the Jewish people as a people, it's the birth of the world, it's the birth of nature, it's the birth of the entire natural cycle. So in some ways, as it says in the Medrash, Mishabachar Ve'elame, when God chose to create the world, Kavalachem, He designated a Rosh Hashanah, which we celebrate 6 months ago in the conventional Rosh Hashanah. Mishabachar B'banov, when He chose His children, when He chose a so-called nation that would transcend nature, when he chose an experience that would transcend nature, a miraculous experience to be able to leave Mitzrayim, to be able to leave the constraints of this universe, Kovalahem, he designated another beginning, and that's the beginning of Nisan, the beginning of the renewal that is experienced in Nisan. What it means in our personal lives is that essentially we too have two cycles, and we have two approaches to things. There are things we approach in a very natural way. All of us, whoever we may be, has our natural needs. We eat, sleep, shelter, the need for companionship. Many of our needs create a mutuality and a common denominator between us and, we'd say, the creatures of this world. In that sense, we're very much part of this world, and we're very much part of its structure. But then there's another part to the human being that distinguishes the human being from nature and from our natural environment, and that's our ability to transcend nature, our ability to sometimes go against even our own natural selves. Animals never change their colors. So they say a leopard does not change its spots, and a tiger doesn't change its stripes, which is not just physically, but also by personality. Each animal, if we study them today, 100 years ago, more or less goes according to a particular scheme, a particular script. And different animal species have their own particular script. Some behave a certain way, but you can literally depend on, like a clock, how animals will hunt, how they will give birth, how they'll care for their young. You have animals that are loners, you have animals that hunt in packs. I mean, we know the diversity of nature, but each one is like a clock. Human beings, though they can be predictable on their natural cycle, you can predict, for example, a human being is going to be hungry. We know a person cannot go 3 days without food. 7 days without food. We know a person cannot go 3 days without water. This is the halachic definition of the parameters of nature. It doesn't really matter how long it is. It's just the point is that there is a predictability to ourselves as well. We know a human being cannot go more than 2 days, 3 days without sleep. Of course, you could do so, but it's very damaging. So there's certain natural elements, many natural elements to us. We know we can only jump that high. We cannot defy gravity. I mean, the list goes on of the natural structure that each of us has, but we also have something of unpredictability, which, as opposed to the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, and the mineral one, we can actually be unpredictable. You can't predict how a person will behave, for example, in moral circumstances. Even a person who's a good moral person, there can be a situation and they suddenly will surprise us. Or the opposite way. We see sometimes people we think are great and have behaved so for many years, and then suddenly something happens and they behave in a way that's completely inconsistent. So there's an element that we can transcend our natures, which I'm going to address at length, of course, tonight. And obviously I'm discussing it more in the positive sense rather than the negative, which distinguishes us from nature. So when we talk about the two cycles of Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Kedoshim, this month celebrates and commemorates and honors the cycle in our lives that's beyond cycle, it's beyond nature, the ability to go out of our constraints. So Rosh Hashanah alone, what happened at the beginning of the universe, can still be defined as a world of structure, which means within the world of structure we can achieve great things, but can we ever transcend the structure? And that's what happened when the Jews left Egypt over 3 millennia ago. What happened was Yetzias Mitzrayim. They were able to get out of the constraints of existence, which has been the philosophical and psychological, and I would say a universal dilemma from the beginning of time. Are we stuck in our structures of the universe? Are we stuck by nature? Or can we reach great heights, transcendent heights? Human beings, some have argued that we're only able to, there's almost like an invisible glass ceiling to our lives. And no matter how high a person yearns or reaches, you're always going to hit that ceiling, that roof. Others argue that a human being has infinite capacity to transcend their existence and can actually find immortality. Why do we say, for example, if the question is asked in the commentaries, that when we begin the 10 Commandments it says, I am your God that redeemed you from Mitzrayim. I am the God that took you out of the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt. It should have said, as the commentaries ask, something greater. I am the God that created heaven and earth. Like the beginning of the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. It seems a much greater achievement that God is a creator, ex nihilo, creator yesh ma'ayin, from nothing, an entire existence, than to say that God took the Jews out of Egypt, which is within existence a redemption, but it's not as great as creating something. Going out of prison happens not necessarily every day. It may be a great celebration for the individual, but from God's perspective, to take someone out of prison, is that a greater achievement of God creating all of existence in the first place? Especially when you're familiar with the dynamics of creation, something that no human being can do. Everything we do is yesh miyesh. We take one thing and we can reshape it. We can reshape it in beautiful forms. I mean, the world in which we live today, which has been transformed, the landscape of the earth. Take a city like New York or any other city. Literally, the entire landscape is completely man-made. You can barely find a tree or a natural corner. And even if there is a Central Park or Prospect Park, it's all been planned. It's almost like giving nature permission to be among the concrete. We create a little space, so we stick a tree in. Once upon a time ago, it was the other way around. This was a wilderness where you had the wild. Nature prevailed. So you see that we've done great things, but all of it, if you think about it, as great as it is, all it is reshaping something. There's nothing that a human being can create from nothing. We take something small, we reshape it. All the great bridges and the great buildings of art and architecture, concrete, stone, metal, iron, and so on, are all objects that are based on something that is natural, that either has become an alloy and been hardened or combined, many different elements, or even synthetic materials. Synthetic materials are still made from particular ingredients. And those ingredients, combined properly, often discovered by mistake, turn into powerful elements that we can build with, and so on and so forth. All comes from something. Nothing is from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. But creation, on the other hand, is a creation from nowhere, so to speak. The closest thing in our lives, welcome, the closest things in our lives to something that is created is a child. The birth of a child, which we all see as miraculous, because like two human beings get together, they have sexual relations, intimate relations, and they conceive a child. Even that is not from nothing. It still is elements that come, both the seed from the man, the egg from the woman. Those are not man-made forces. They combine and they release some type of force that with God's blessing conceives a child. No one fully understands how that life is born. And suddenly becomes who we are today, the complex individual that sits in therapy, with all the weights and burdens that we have, all conceived from where? From something that was once minuscule, smaller than a thread of hair. But it is compared to almost something created, because it's almost like from nothing. That from something that you would never imagine could bear life, bears life. But that too is still not from nothing completely. Whereas when you talk about creation, as the Torah and especially the mystics explain it, it's literally from a state of nothingness became something. There was a point where nothing existed, and then something existed. We'll talk about that a little more. It could only be a God that transcends nothing, and something that can create from something nothing. Now you may wonder, what else is there if it's not nothing, and if it's not something, what else is there? Well, as you'll discover, there is something that is not something and not nothing. You can't even call it something, but it's beyond both of them. We'll talk about it a little more as we go through this evening. Hopefully master a state that we can't even call by name, because if I call it something, then it's something. If I call it nothing, it's nothing. So what could be something that is neither something nor nothing? How do you like that? A third option. But you'll see there's something inside. I don't want to even call it something, but there's this, whatever this unknown entity is, we all have it within us, and we all can access it. And as I'll explain, you'll see that's actually something that's very present in your life all the time. Something that's neither something nor nothing. Okay? So this is for a little suspense rather. We'll get to that. So the question, going back to the question, is that it should have said that God that created heaven and earth is a much greater accomplishment than God who redeemed the people, that redeemed them and took them out of Egypt. And the answer given is a fascinating one. For us, creation is a very unprecedented and divine act. Only God can create, we cannot. But for God, to create is not a major thing. It's just another day day of work, a day in His life, so to speak, in God's life. What is a greater achievement is that in a world which is defined, once it's created, and created by divine design, a world of structure, that within that structure, one could argue, you can never transcend or defy that structure. Only God can create, we cannot. But for God, so within a structure that has defined parameters and divine parameters, the argument can be made, once it's put in place, how could you ever defy those rules? If you defy those rules, you're destroying that existence. Think of it in terms of what we human beings create. From something. Someone builds a machine. Every machine has its rules. That's what defines this machine is different than another machine. If you have a refrigerator, it has its guidelines. If you start trying to use a refrigerator for something that's an air conditioner, it's not going to work. Well, maybe those two are too close. But a refrigerator, you're going to try to use it as a radio, it's not going to work. So every structure has its particular parameters. That's what makes it unique. It's finite, defined parameters with a particular guidebook, a particular user's manual that fits this object and not that one. So yes, if you come home with a box and there's a computer in the box and by mistake someone put in a manual that tells you how to drive a car, that manual is not going to work for this, for what's in this box. Because each thing has its parameters. Nothing wrong with that. So to suggest that you can take something that has defined parameters, a machine, and then take that machine and that machine should be able to do something that's beyond that machine, seems like an illogical premise. Because it's precisely created and built to be this way by these rules. So now let's apply it to the universe. Mitzrayim, as you know, refers to constraints, structure, certain parameters, boundaries. That's what Meitzar means, boundaries. Mitzrayim, Meitzar, boundaries. Since we exist within these boundaries, so to suggest that we can, who are inside these boundaries, defy these boundaries, inside the structure, transcend the structure, seems like an impossible paradox. Because if you transcend the structure, you're no longer in it. If you're in it, you can't get out of it. You can't be in it and out of it, so to speak, at the same time. So for God to be able to take a human being that is the finite and say, here you exist in a world of Mitzrayim in particular boundaries, and still I allow you, I give you the power to redeem yourself from these boundaries, that is a greater achievement because it's essentially a nimna nimnois. It's essentially a combination of a paradox that creation does not pose for God. Because for God to create, being God, God can do things that we cannot even conceive of. So God didn't act like that. But for example, can a human being create? Can a creature create? That would seem like an impossibility. Because we don't have the power to create because we ourselves are creatures. In other words, we can't invest and expend power that we ourselves do not have. Or to use the expression of the Talmud, Ein chavush mater satzme. A person who is fettered, a person in prison cannot free themselves. If you're in a pit, for instance, a deep pit, and you have no way, and you don't have any tools to get out of that pit, you can't lift yourself out of the pit yourself. You need someone to throw you a rope that will take you out of it. Because when you're trapped in a particular situation, or you're defined by that situation, you yourself cannot free yourself from the situation. That would be the contradiction I'm describing. So, for instance, you can jump a certain height. You can jump that high. If you want to jump further than that, you need assistance from someone outside of you. So basically, it comes down to that the rule of thumb is that anything that is defined by a structure, by definition, cannot defy that structure. So that God should create something, that's like God outside of the structure creating a structure. That's a great achievement, something that is completely beyond our scope of understanding. We have examples of it, but we don't fully understand how that's possible. We definitely can't recreate it, no pun intended. But so that is as magnificent and as wondrous that may be. Still, it's not as powerful as being able to give human beings who are limited the ability to get outside of their limits, which of course is the great gift. Because to say that you can leave the structure and free yourself, that's one thing. But to say that you still remain within it and you don't have to compromise your life, at the same time you can experience transcendence, that's a big achievement. And just to emphasize the greatness of it, let me put it in terms of school of thought. There are two schools of thought about the capacity of a human being. Some people argue, thinkers, and this is across the board, thinkers throughout history, argue that a human being, with all our yearnings and wishes and hopes and dreams, we ultimately are trapped in the finite structure of our existence. Especially science, from a scientific point of view, the argument can be made very strongly that we are, as I said earlier, so controlled by the rules of nature that it would be impossible to imagine a human being truly transcendent. Yet you find, especially the mystical thinkers, that have always searched for transcendence, another school of thought that argues that a human being can reach heights highly unimaginable to science or to a rational thinking person. As a matter of fact, some even argue that Western thought, as opposed to Eastern thought, is distinguished by these two schools of thought. Where Western philosophy and Western thinkers essentially really argue that things are defined by structures, and you can push the boundaries to a certain point through intellectual pursuits, through art, through love, through other methods, but you ultimately don't really connect to the infinite. Whereas in Far Eastern thought, the idea of the infinite is a very common reality, and it's the finite world that's somewhat of an illusion and somewhat of a almost distraction. And that when you are able to transcend your own rational boundaries, and different Buddhist or Hindu concepts, especially for instance in Zen Buddhism, the experience of the koans, or other types of exercises, really come to train you through different meditative practices to come to a place of what they call the infinite light. And that you can reach it if you are able to see that this universe is just a distraction, or at best just a concealment of what really lies within. Basic mystic thought argues that, but especially Far Eastern really makes a big emphasis of that the world that we see and the finite existence we see is a very, very superficial dimension. So which one is correct? Now again, just for the record, I'm not suggesting that in Western thought there is no concept of transcendence and getting beyond the visible and the surface level. Nor am I suggesting that in Eastern thought there is no structure of existence. It's just that the emphasis in each one of them. So let's look at Jewish thought. What does Judaism say about this? So within Jewish thinkers, especially those that don't have familiarity with the whole picture, some argue that Judaism is very much the former. Judaism and Torah is all about structure. Mitzvahs, rituals, traditions. You do this, you're not allowed to do that. In the classical term of religion, religion is very confining experience. There may be virtues to it. It helps discipline a person. It helps channel a human being to be productive, virtuous, instead of just following your own desires and self-indulging. But nevertheless, the structures are very clear. We're coming from Passover now. Most people will tell you Passover is extremely structured. You can't eat this for 8 days. You must eat matzah. You can't eat bread. Then during the Seder, there's a whole bunch of rituals. If you go to a very Orthodox, a very ultra-Orthodox home, it's not just that there are rituals, people are almost obsessive with it. And if you do something a little off, you can be yelled at or thrown out or excommunicated. I mean, religion has been defined by many as being a very controlling, authoritative approach. I'm not even getting into the unhealthy elements of it, which I've discussed. It's not the theme tonight. Even though it's a favorite theme of mine, but it's not for tonight. Even in a healthy environment, bottom line is religion, with all its virtues that it does create certain focus and channeling and so on, yet most would not argue that religion is a transcendent experience. It's all about particular rituals that we follow. Yom Kippur is certain, you don't eat, you pray, and so on. Which for some seems to suggest the antithesis to free-spirited experiences. A free spirit doesn't have anything you conform to. In other words, many people would define religion by the word conformity. Again, for good reasons, that can be justified, there are many positive redeeming qualities to it, but definitely a form of conformity. Whereas so to speak, as I said, the mystical or spiritual approach, especially in the Far East, is a very non-conformist approach, meaning it's all about transcending limitations, not boundaries. Like I remember once speaking to a guru, but a master of the Far Eastern disciplines, and said to me that all the mitzvahs are all about limiting a person's potential, whereas the meditative practices of the East is about opening up a person's potential. And he gave me examples of people he've met that when they grew up in a traditional, let's say Jewish or even for that matter Catholic upbringing, it was all about you have to do it this way. You cannot follow your own heart or soul. This is the way to do it. And with all the explanations that we know better, and the Torah knows better, or the tradition knows better. So all that comes down to being a form of, as I said, even if it's justifiable, and it could be, but it's still all about, in a sense, limiting a person's wingspan rather than expanding it. But this is true only if you know half of Judaism. And that's the ritual part, the body of Judaism. The soul of Judaism, and I would even submit that the Far Eastern disciplines actually are rooted in the soul of Judaism, because Abraham, many trace Far Eastern thought to Abraham, like as in Brahmin, in Hindu, rooted in the word Abraham, and many other references that when you study Jewish mysticism, and really I wouldn't call it even Jewish mysticism, but rooted in Torah and Zohar and so on, you discover the entire focus is on the spirit within, which is a higher unity, which is very not defined by limited structures. It is about an infinite light. But in a fascinating way, when you really study it properly, you come to realize that in Jewish mysticism, the ultimate emphasis is the fusion of the finite and the infinite. Instead of ignoring or somewhat dismissing through asceticism or other forms of, we'll call it escapism, or other forms of denial of material immersion, instead of doing that, in Judaism the ultimate goal is fusion of the infinite and the finite. And this is built on a principle which states that the divine is neither finite nor infinite, and therefore neither of them are mutually exclusive. So if you were to argue, as some mystics do, that the infinite is the ultimate goal, to transcend our finite view of this universe, then one would say that you ultimately compromise the finite part of its existence. Some go even further and say there is no really finite part, it's only in our illusion, it's only our imagination, it's only our limited myopic vision that doesn't allow us to see it. In Judaism, the ultimate paradox is that the finite universe absolutely exists. It's not an illusion. It's not even it could be a distraction, but it is a reality. And yet at the same time, the infinite is a reality, and there's a third place, which is neither finite nor infinite, that allows us to integrate the two. So in other words, even as we travel toward the light, even as we travel toward a higher state of consciousness, the objective is to bring it back into this state of consciousness. In using Kabbalistic or Hasidic terminology, it's the union and fusion of what's called Das Elyon and Das Tachton. Das Elyon would mean the perspective from above, the divine perspective, which sees the finite universe as a novelty, as a superimposed state. The natural existence would be one of unity as opposed to fragmentation, one of light as opposed to one of darkness, one of revelation as opposed to concealment. The lower perspective, Das Tachton, is the way we look at it from the bottom up. From the bottom up, we see a fragmented universe, we see many components and pieces, and we search for inner unity within. And we've discovered it through science and through other methods. But it's still a perspective from below. It's almost like the difference, you can say, a perspective from inside out and outside in. Just to make this a little palatable, let's talk about ourselves. You and I, we see everything except ourselves from the outside in. You see me from the outside in. What that means is, you meet me for the first time, or I meet you for the first time, and what do you see? You see a body, you see a particular shape, you see a height, a color of hair, or color of no hair, or color of eyes, whatever it is, the body language that we project. And then, when you begin to communicate with someone, you begin to realize they have thoughts, ideas, and so on. Now, of course, we know that to be so, because if I look like you, you imagine if you have thoughts and feelings, I must have thoughts and feelings. You don't need a lot of brilliance to process that. But to fully understand another person requires communication, requires time, And even then, do you really get to know your a person? How much do you really know about another person? How much do we even know about ourselves? But hopefully with honest communication, and you, let's say, find someone you really care about or you love, you ultimately do begin to understand them in a much deeper way that would never have been obvious on the surface level. A person can smile to you and they could be in pain inside. They could show a sour face and be very happy inside. In other words, what you see is not what you get. This is called outside-in experiences. The same is true when you look at this table or this chair or any phenomenon. You walk down the street, the first thing you do is you use your sensory tools, which is essentially sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Our eyes, our ears, and our taste, touch, and smell to try to analyze or process a phenomenon around us. This is outside in. Slowly, as you process and you analyze and you research, you can come to discover what's going on beneath the surface. So this is the classic approach and the conventional approach that all of us are bound by. We really have no other way of discovery. This is how we discover things. And this is true not just in relationships with objects or people. It's true in research, business research, research on any topic. You begin with seeing the surface level, the superficial. You Google or you do other research today. We have different research tools. And you come to discover more information until at some point you can say, I have an opinion on the matter. If you're an intelligent, objective person, you're going to, of course, wait till you gather as many facts as you can before you come to a conclusion. Some people jump to conclusions. That's just either lazy thinking or casual or just arrogant. An intelligent person knows that the outside is never what really is going on, and you really need to analyze it. This is what we call analysts. They analyze. Hopefully an honest and objective analyst will give you a good understanding of what goes on within. When you go to a doctor, any type of doctor, or expert, what is really the definition of an expert or a doctor? A person who has the experience, the knowledge, and the time to have explored something you have not. So if it's a doctor, a medical doctor, it's someone who understands the human body in ways we may not. So you can tell them I have pain here, or I have this happened to me, or that happened, symptoms. And the doctor, with his trained eye and his experience, hopefully can identify what the cause of those symptoms are. If it's more mysterious, then you go to a better expert. Sometimes you get several opinions. Even then, they could be wrong. Any humble doctor will tell you that. Because we only have our five senses to really, as tools to understand in the inside, what works on the inside. But with hard-earned experience, with years of training, with learning of what those that came before us, what they learned and their trial and error and mistakes, we come to some type of understanding of the inside workings of the universe, which today we have made great progress. But anyone will tell you, especially the greatest experts, that how much progress we've made, there's so much more of the inside we still don't know. So maybe 100 years ago, someone would have said, like they say, whether it's a myth or not, I don't know, that the patent general the head of the U.S. Patent Office in 1898 resigned, saying that everything that could be discovered has been discovered in 1898. Mind you, this is before Einstein, this is before computers, this is before the atomic revolution, the nuclear revolution. Today, no one will say that. And you think, why not? If in 1898 someone thought that, in 1998, 2008, we should definitely, because now we've discovered so much more. How much more can there be? But as we know, as you climb a mountain and you see broader horizons, you don't get to know less. You don't get to think that you know more. You get to know, if I climb a little more, the horizon, I'm sure, will be greater. So the more you know, the less you know, basically. This is not meant to minimize what we know. It just meant to mean that the more you know, the more you see how much there is to know. That's what intelligence is about. And the same is true with human nature. As I've told you, my little impromptu, non-scientific survey that I did. I asked people of different ages, how much percent, from 1 to 10, meaning let's say from 1 to 100, percentage-wise, do you know about yourself? 100% meaning you know everything about yourself, and 1% meaning you know 1/100th of you about yourself. The younger the age, the higher the percentage. So you ask someone that's like 10, 12 years old, they'll say 80, 90%. You ask someone 20 years old, they'll say 60%. You ask someone 40 years old, it'll go to 40%. You ask someone 90 years old, they'll say something like 1%, maybe. And I've tried it. What does that mean? Obvious. It means the more experience in life, the more mysterious it is. This doesn't mean the older person knows less, obviously, than the 20-year-old. It means that he knows more, and that's why he's able to state that. So with that attitude, In a sense, knowledge is itself a paradox. The more you know, the more you see how little you know. This does not, by the way, minimize what you know. It just enhances, actually, because the fact that scientists have that humility, that they know very little part of it, that allowed them to continue to explore. Continue means that you don't have it all figured out, so you know you're open to discovering something new. If we thought we had it all figured out, we would not move further forward. So with all that being said, to go back to the theme that I'm discussing here, the argument could be made, not the argument, we were talking about the two approaches. Are we essentially finite creatures trapped in our own psychological structures and fears and constraints, Mitzrayim, or do we have the power to transcend? As I said, throughout history there have been two schools of thought. One argued the former, the other the latter. Some said we do not have the power to transcend. If we do, it's very limited and very defined by the laws of the structure. Yes, once upon a time we could not fly like a bird, and now we created an airplane that allows us to defy gravity. A human being can't physically fly like a bird, but we build structures that simulate a bird's flight and allow us to travel far distant places in quick moments. Once upon a time we could not go to the moon or to outer space, and today we can. So that would be meaning things that were once unimaginable. Is that miraculous? So any real scientist will tell you it's not really miraculous. It was not conceivable at the time because we didn't know we can build such machines. Today we know that the parameters of existence are much broader than we thought they were. But the argument doesn't mean necessarily that we're transcendent creatures. It means that we were able to go beyond what we've gone, and we'll probably continue to do that. So the more so-called, pessimistic attitude of the human being, of the approach to a human being, is that we are, like animals, basically limited, but we push the boundaries as much as we can. But we'll never relieve ourselves of the existential tension of living limited by the parameters and the boundaries of our existence. As I said, mystics and lovers, perhaps, and musicians and artists will argue that there is another dimension which is called transcendence. And it's very real. And it's not just about building another machine that instead of jumping 100 feet high, you can jump 100 miles high, which is really just quantitative. It's truly about qualitative transcendence. You really can transcend and free yourself from the boundaries of existence. But, as I said, some will argue that that's at the expense of recognizing the price you pay to get there. You have to recognize that the material existence in which you exist is not real. Or it's a distraction, or it's concealment. I mean, there are different ways to look at it. Or it's a total illusion. This is a basis of many Far Eastern disciplines. Judaism, as I'm suggesting here, argues a third option, that both are real. That from a perspective below, which is also very much part of reality, there's very clear parameters for existence. These are not illusions that one has to transcend. They are real. Yet there's another part of us that has the ability to see things from the inside out. And how is it possible, and we have the ability and the power to fuse these two. How is that possible? You're either in the system or you're out of it. The answer is because the divine force that created both is neither finite nor infinite. To use a statement from Ibn Gabbai, one of the great middle-aged mystics, in his book called Avodas HaKodesh, which means the sacred holy service, he says that Keshem, he's talking about God, Keshem sheyesh lekeiche bilti bal gvul, just like he has the power to create the infinite, the power of infinity, kach yesh lekeiche b'gvul, so too he has the power to create the finite. Which in mystical or Kabbalistic language is essentially the difference between the lights and the containers, the energy and the containers. One being of finite nature and one being of infinite nature, one being of finite nature. But when this statement is analyzed and explained, how is that possible? That's only possible by something that is neither finite nor infinite. To say something is infinite, in a way, is also telling you that it's finite in a certain fashion. Why? That's what he continues. He says, because if you say that God is only infinite and not finite, that too is a statement of a finite statement. He's this and not that. So, for example, the infinite state of numbers is not a finite state of numbers. In that sense, they are finite. Not finite in quantity, but in quality. They don't encompass the finite state of being or the finite state of numbers. Everyone follows that? So, bottom line, when you ultimately explain it, it comes down to realizing that God is neither finite nor infinite, neither matter nor spirit. So where most people would say, okay, you either live a material life or you live a spiritual life. You either live a life defined by the material existence, parameters of existence, or a spiritual life. Spiritual for many would be what's called God. The Torah would say material, spiritual, and then godly. It's 3 different levels. The spiritual and the material ultimately are 2 different worlds. And it's the godly that allows us to fuse material and spiritual. That's why in Torah you find emphasis both on finite mitzvahs, rituals and traditions that are very defined, but at the same time, if you connect to the spirit of them, it's very undefined. Just to give you an example to show you that this is possible, music is a perfect example. Musical notes are very defined. When you take music lessons, or for that matter, even if you're a master, there are musical notes on the sheet that you're reading, and they're very defined. Here's the first note and the next note, and they have a tempo, and they have a beat, and they have a speed. They're very, very structured. There are only that many musical notes on a page. There are only that many musical notes on the musical scale altogether. Yet, when someone actually plays music in a beautiful way, you don't hear finite, you hear infinite. You hear a power that's released from this page. You'd never imagine that these finite notes can create such infinite amount of combinations. Now you could say, well, if you're reaching the infinite through the music, what do you need the notes for? And you could just freestyle, play by ear. It's true, you can. But you ask any master musician, they'll say the notes, the structure allows me to actually transcend the structure. Much more than if I did just doing it on the fly. And this is true about anything. Think of words, letters. I'm using letters now, I'm speaking to you. I'm using words, phrases, paragraphs. They're all made up of the same alphabet. A, B, C, D, A to Z. Letters that combine to words that combine to phrases that combine into ideas. I can convey an idea here that far, far transcends the 20 some letters in the English alphabet. There are 22 in the Hebrew. How many in the English alphabet? 26. Like Havaya, right? Like Yud Kei Vav Kei? Yeah. Yeah. Regardless, it's a defined number. So if someone looked at letters, if you looked from the outside in, you'd say, letters, how can anybody communicate love or communicate amorphous concepts and ideas and abstractions with 26 letters? They're limited, and each letter itself only has one certain way you pronounce it. A is A, B, B. Yet suddenly, when you put together, let's say a word like soul, S sounds like S, O is O, U, U, L, L. Separately, they're meaningless. S, O, U, L, if you saw them separately, they mean nothing to you. They're ingredients. They're pieces that have yet to come to put together in a word called soul. And what does it elicit? Volumes and volumes of feelings and ideas. The word love, L-O-V-E. Because there is a place where the finite meets the infinite, and that if we are able to touch a place, and those people that communicate well can use words to express things that are beyond words. There's some people that can't do that. They're bound by their words, and they stick to it, and it's dry and empty. Just like some people play musical notes, and it doesn't sound like anything very nice. Someone else takes the same notes, and it turns into magic. And you go on and on and on. We are creatures that are made of structure, but we also have the power to transcend structure because there's a place that's beyond both of them. Which leads me now to the theme that we defined for tonight's discussion, and it's already discussed. I just didn't translate it in these terms. When we come from Passover, as I just said, the power of Passover is the ability not to create something new, a new cycle, a new nature. It's to take the structure of nature that all of us are bound by, Mitzrayim, and Yetzias Mitzrayim, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Heitzisicha, and be able to transcend and get out of these limits, which is the ultimate gift of life. That within a world of structure, you can reach a place beyond structure. So many years in leap year, the Shabbos after Passover, we read this chapter, Kedoshim, the chapter that we will read this Shabbos. As a matter of fact, when you consider every week, and you study Chitas or other certain sections that we study, because Passover, because there was a Shabbos, because the week of Passover itself was on a Shabbos, the seventh day of Passover was Shabbos, so that week, last week, was also the Parsha Kedoshim. So it's really like 2 weeks of this chapter. But regardless, what is the message of Kedoshim? Being that it's the Shabbos that follows Passover, and we know that on Shabbos everything that happened during the week is elevated. So in many ways, Kedoshim is like the climax in a way that elevates. That is like the so-called finale of the Passover experience. What is Passover supposed to lead us into? A new type of life. I know some of us may say, hey, I've done Passover many times and I haven't been changed. But the fact is, the power of Passover is supposed to change our lives. Not to sound overly simplistic. It's supposed to introduce something new type of hope, new type of growth. In this case, renewal. Chedesh, ha-chedesh hazelachem. Renewal. But renewal that within our structures we can find ways to get beyond our structure. If someone told us, listen, the only way is for you to leave the structure, you have to move to a mountain and escape it all, that may make more sense, may also not be that appealing. The great beauty of it is that it's telling us that within Mitzrayim, within our constraints, within our structures, we can get beyond that. So the Shabbos afterwards, we read a chapter that actually tells us what to do and how to do it. The chapter begins, Kedoshim to you. You shall be sacred. You shall be sacred people. Kedoshim meaning sacred. You shall be sacred. The word Kadosh means sacred. Kedoshim is referring to the people being sacred. And then it continues, Kedoshim to you, Ki Kodesh Ani, because I, God, am sacred. What is the meaning of this verse? And what does it mean to be sacred? Why not say, be good, be virtuous, be charitable, be giving? What is the sacredness? In a sense, you could ask the question in different terms. As someone once told me, they shouldn't have called God God, they should have called God good. There's a missing an O. Goodness we'd understand, but God sounds like something that we don't relate to. Some people would even say God is the God of vengeance. God is a God that brings sometimes things that aren't that good. Some don't see goodness. So you could ask the question, what is the difference between good and being virtuous and being good and being godly? What is the difference between virtue and sanctity? Or to rephrase it, some people can say, why do we need faith? Why do we need to connect to the divine? I'll be a good person, a loving person, a kind person. And there's no question the Torah's message is about kindness, about love, about being giving, charitable, compassionate, empathetic. So what is this meaning of Kedusha that we find so often in the Torah? Before the Jews received the Torah, it says, V'atam tiyeli mamleches koyanim v'goy kodesh. You shall be for me a kingdom of priests, and goy kodesh, a sacred nation. And everywhere we find Kedusha. Every mitzvah, we say a blessing. Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu. This is the mitzvah that you sanctified us with these mitzvahs you've given us. Sanctity. And it's repeated countless times. Kedusha. And here's a chapter, an entire chapter, that's called Kedoshim to you, Ki Kodesh Ani. And the answer, briefly, is what I've discussed till now. Kedusha is saying not just that you take the parameters of existence and stretch them till you become a good person, and you stretch goodness as far as humans can do, but you actually can move from the human to the divine. That we have the ability to transcend even goodness. That even our goodness can become infinite goodness. Because when you say a person is good, you could say good, but on our terms. Just as you were limited, our goodness will be limited. Kedusha introduces another dimension, a divine dimension, that the good you do, the virtue you do, is not just man-made or generated by your natural parameters, but actually introduces a dimension that's called supernatural, beyond. And I'll give an example. I remember this class, someone had asked, I was discussing the topic of the difference between a good person and a person who does good things. And I mentioned that a person who does good things, while they're doing the things, they're good. When they're not doing them, they may not be that good. Whereas a good person means technically 24/7, even when they're asleep, even when they're not actually acting and doing a good act, they're also a good person. What is the difference? So at the end of the class, a person came over to me, and literally with tears in his eyes, he was like maybe 45, 6 years old, says to me that, after all these years, I first understand my feelings about my father, who had recently died. He told me. He said, my father was a very powerful man, a very successful man, a very good man in many ways. Everyone knew in our community that you could always depend on him. He helped people financially, otherwise. Tuesday night was an open night in our home. Anyone can come, and whether it was for advice, whether for a loan, for help in getting a job, any favor, and he had good connections, and he helped people unconditionally. And I grew up in such an environment, and it was a very powerful effect on me. But then there was another part of my father that was very not so good. I saw him behave in ways that were very cruel in our own home. And if you came, God forbid, on Wednesday night, when he had his poker game, you weren't even let in, no matter what you needed. And as a child, you're confused by these mixed messages. On one hand, you see such goodness. On the other, you see such selfishness. And he says, I understand no person is perfect. And I'm not suggesting I was looking for perfection in my father, but the paradox seemed strange. And tonight, for the first time, I have the answer. And the answer is my father did good things, not necessarily was a good person. Which means that maybe Tuesday night, this was his custom, because he saw it in his parents' home. That's the custom. He did goodness, but on his terms, when it was convenient for him. And I don't take away, he told me clearly, I don't take away from that goodness, because the fact is other people don't even do that. So he helped many people. But as a son, I think about it, and he did it when it was convenient. What would have really made him into a great person, not just a good person, not just one who's doing great things, would have been if he could do it when it was not convenient, when it was not on schedule, like on a Wednesday night or another time. And essentially what he was saying is that there's a state where, yes, we can be good, but it's good on certain terms. I mean, I've had this question at this table. People ask, what is our obligation when you're walking down the street, you see a homeless person? And very likely that you give him money, he's not going to be something healthy. You may use it for alcohol, for drugs, etc., etc. He's not necessarily going to take the money, put it aside, gather more, and then be able to go find himself a job. So we have the obligation to give charity in that case. Let's say you even know for sure. You see him take the money, you see he goes to a liquor store or some other thing like that. So you can just say, listen, your thing is to give money, give him charity. What's your business how he uses it? Or maybe not. And it's a question, it's just an example. It can be many other scenarios. What's our obligation in the context of charity, empathy, and so on? I mean, I should add, I remember in this class here, once at the end of the class, someone came in here, one of these local con artists. When I say local, I mean in the tri-state area. And comes in with a whole story how him and his daughter are stranded and they need car fare to go back somewhere deep in New Jersey. He said, where's your daughter? He left her in the car. The story started falling apart pretty quickly. And I remember, it was very clear to 5, 6 people sitting at the table that this guy is just full of it. He's probably doing it to everyone around. But not to my surprise, I wasn't surprised, but someone pulled out how much do you need? He needed something like $60. I don't know if he gave him 60, but he gave him $30, maybe $40. So afterwards, I asked him. I said, that, and not that I dissuaded him from doing it. By all means, everyone has a right to do as they wish. So I said to him, that probably it's not using it for car fare. So he says, something? I decided that I want God to treat me the same way I treated this guy. He should also overlook my discretions and lies. So I gave it to him, and that way I hope I'll get tit for tat, treated the same way. Okay, so there's definitely that element of so-called charity, which I'm sure has an interesting twist. But nevertheless, on a more practical level, what's our obligation? And especially if you know that the money may be used for drugs, which actually then you've contributed to someone's self-destruction. So my response to this was, I thought about it, I said to myself, well, let me ask you something. Why are you giving money altogether to this homeless person? Why don't you invite him home for dinner and have a conversation and find... No, I don't want that guy in my house. So compassion ends exactly when what? When you throw him a few coins and you feel good about yourself because you're also giving, and you move on. Why don't you help him find a job? Why don't you find out about his life? Because you don't have time for that. And this is easy. So in other words, this isn't about just whether you're being good or not good. It's about good where you decided what is good. Maybe if I told you your responsibility is to actually look into the person's life, if you really care. And what about when one day you pass by this guy and you're in such a bad mood, you don't even notice him. Or you say, you know what, get these guys off the street here. What's going on? And we know people, the same person who can be compassionate one moment, the next time is irritated by the same thing that yesterday evoked empathy. So in other words, this is all about you. It's not about necessarily what's right. You're doing what you think alleviates your guilt, or makes you feel compassion. You know, I'm a giving guy. Other people ignore the helpless guy, and I'm like giving. Now, I'm not judging any individual choice each one of us make. I'm just analyzing it in context of what is really good. So there's goodness that we do on our terms. Is that not good? Absolutely. I'm not suggesting it's not a good act, because there are people that don't do that either. When it comes to charity, for instance, the Torah actually doesn't really mind, no matter what your ulterior motive is. Bottom line, someone else is being helped. Who cares what you think? There are mitzvahs that if your motive is not good, it could actually, so to speak, be destructive. You know, for example, prayer without kavanah is considered to be like a body without a soul. But charity, because the end result is what counts, you help somebody else. Even if you lose, let's say, $1 in the street. Listen to this. And a poor person finds it, which not to your knowledge, and uses it to buy food or to help or to help his family. Even had you been told, you know something a poor person found, and you say, you know what, I don't want him to use it, I want the money back. Whatever reason. Which means that you actually have a negative feeling. You don't even want to give it to him. But you lost it and he happened to find it. It's considered that you get the mitzvah of charity. Why? Because the bottom line is he was helped. It really makes no difference what you think. Now obviously in charity, Maimonides enumerates 10 levels. The highest level, of course, is giving it with a good heart. With a smile. Some people give charity with a sour face. Is the charity mitzvah performed? Absolutely. But it's not the best way, because the bottom line, the person was helped. The highest level of charity is Maimonides describes as giving with dignity, which may even be giving a loan, not even a charitable donation. A loan meaning giving the person the dignity, not to feel they're just takers, but they actually put them on their feet, help them get a job. But you know, he talks about the dignity of giving anonymously, where the person who's receiving doesn't know it's coming from you, so there's no shame. The different levels that you don't know who you're giving to, the person who's receiving doesn't know who he's getting from. Anyway, there's a bunch of levels, and it's very fascinating just to understand human nature and how we give. But the bottom line is, even in the worst scenario, someone else was helped. You get from that, let's say you did it because of honor, or because you want your name on a plaque, or the name on the building, or because you can then enter into an insiders club where you can get investors because you became part of a board of high net worth people. So be it. That's the truth. Big incentive for many of the big givers in some of the UJA or other so-called established charities. You go to parties, you're honored, headlines. So from a Torah point of view, should we just request selfless giving? Yeah, maybe more virtuous. Is it maybe more? But the bottom line is the person is helped. That's the bottom line. But I'm talking about something else here, defining our own level of refinement in the process. And this is the difference between being a good person and doing good things. So goodness, even just being not good at all, we're not discussing here. But even goodness and virtue can be done on human terms, on your terms, but not on terms that are inconvenient to you. Like this guy, Wednesday night not, or other times that it didn't work for him. And that's where you move over from being good to being godly. Now, why is that so necessary? Why not just be good? Because, number one, is goodness will always be limited if it's ultimately defined by human parameters. Whereas the other type of goodness is one that is really infinite. And I'll give an example which we all can identify with in love. I was using the word good, but now let's replace it with the word love. You love somebody. It's a very good word, and people love the word love, meaning it's like very popular. We all want love in our lives, and we all think it's a healthy thing to have love, to be loved and to love. But let's define what is love exactly. Because many people really have a very distorted definition of love. Is love about giving or is it about taking? So of course, the wise person will say it's both. Very nice. But let's bottom line. Most of us, does it play itself out in a form of giving or in a form of taking? We have a need called love. The need can be defined as a need to be nurtured, a need for companionship, a need for intimacy, a need for respect, a need for validation. The list goes on. Maybe it's beyond all that as well. Since we have that need, we go searching for love. If we have healthy parents in our childhood, that love will come to us from them naturally. But then yet, we go into adults, we still want love from strangers. We want love, want to find a partner in life, hopefully a soulmate. So in that context, we have a need and we go out searching. Because that need is so strong, we're ready to give something for it. I'm using an economics theory on love here. Like an economist theory on love would be that because the value of the commodity is so high, you're ready to pay a price. What's the price? That you'll give part of yourself to that person. You'll give a lot of yourself. Certain inconveniences, certain compromises. This is a very prevalent theory of love, especially if you take the Darwinian, Freudian model of the human being. There's no question that essentially love is a selfish act. Dawkins wrote a book, The Selfish Gene, that everything is about the genes perpetuating itself. Part of way of perpetuating itself is that you need to mate with someone. So let's just take not the human being for a moment because it's hard for us to really identify. Let's take bacteria or other local species. For them, mating is not a very big type of romantic experience. They don't need bars, they don't need dating services, they don't need J-Date or whatever other dating things. They don't need all the preliminaries. They know why they were created. There comes a point, the mating season, and they mate. It's very non-glamorous, and you could see it. I mean, there may be elaborate systems of how they court each other, but as I described earlier, it's very much like a clock. The bottom line, nature knows that the time has come. No different than the pollination of flowers. The animals mate in particular ways. Some argue that there's a quirk, which was really like a distorted quirk of evolution, that human beings created some type of elaborate need for romance and courtship. That if human beings had evolved properly, they should have been just as non-dramatic as bacteria. Because the bottom line is perpetuation of the species. Survival of the fittest. So, but for us it's quite repulsive to think that way. We don't like to think of ourselves as two bacteria meeting and mating, and the whole purpose of love is just to get two people together. In other words, love is not an end in itself. Love is a sense of nature's trick. I feel loved, you feel loved, it's a whole warm thing, it's nurturing, it's sexual, blah, blah, blah. It has thrills to it, it's exciting, a mystique. All the bottom line is just a big grand trick to deceive intelligent human beings to thinking that this is a really romantic thing, when the bottom line is to get two bacteria together so they should create a third, a next generation. How do you like that interpretation? Very few people like it. But you know something? If you really study science today, the prevalent theory is more or less something like this. Except no one's going to tell it to you quite this way because it's just too it's hard for us to accept. But it comes down to, that's what it is. The gene is selfish and it has to perpetuate itself, so it does whatever it takes. The fact that we develop minds and hearts and we think we're sophisticated and romantic and all of that, it happens to be just a thing that nature has to get over, so it does whatever it does to get us to believe that we really love each other, etc., etc. I mean, of course, this is a very stark and maybe somewhat exaggerated, but it essentially is the prevalent scientific theory. You can check it up. This is not my take on it. What is the Torah's view? The Torah's view is that love is about transcendence. That two human beings, that God created the human being, male and female, as one, separated them, and they continuously search for each other. So love is not about a need that you're ready to pay a price for. Since I need you, I'm ready to give you what you need. It's a transaction, except we won't call it a business transaction. The fact is, many marriages are almost like a business transaction. That's why money becomes a factor and other factors. If it was truly love, how can anything really get in the way? Let's be honest. It's because there's other things, there's selfish needs involved. And a person will say, what do you mean? I love, but love is conditional. If I love that person as long as I get my needs met. But do you think, for example, a mother or a father that truly and healthily loves a child will make this statement? That my love is conditional if I get my needs met? How would you like to be born to parents like that? Where a mother would say, listen, I only have till 11 o'clock for you. I don't care if you have a cold or you're sick. I don't care if you're 1 day old. There's no crying after 11 o'clock. I lock the door and that's it. Because my needs are not getting met. I have to go to work tomorrow morning. So you could say, okay, in that case, the child is helpless, a vulnerable, a healthy mother. How could a healthy mother say that? But it's deeper than that. It's not just some type of calculation. Love is love. When you really love somebody, there's really almost no, it's unconditional. Because it's not about how much you get. It's not a calculation, I figured out I'm getting so much and so much, therefore I'm ready to give so much and so much. And when you start, when the math doesn't work, that you're giving more than you're getting, obviously in a bank account or in a business, you pull out. But in a relationship, that's not what it comes down to. Now, why is it possible for us to pull out today? Why are so many relationships non-committal or let's call it not eternal? Is because the attitude toward love is, number one, is distorted. It's what we picked up in movies and books, and it's mostly driven by need. It's need driven. A love that's driven by giving, which is, as I'm leading to, that the goodness, just like as it is with goodness, the same thing is with love. It's not about love just on your terms. It's about a love that becomes connected to a divine element inside of us. So to say, why do I need faith? Why do I need God? I'll just be good and virtuous. I'll just be loving. Why do I need God? The answer is, then your love is also on your terms. And no matter how you twist it, no matter how good of a person you are, all of us are structured human beings. As I began this class tonight about leaving Egypt, as I said, this is the Shabbos after that, the beauty and the power of the exodus from Egypt was that within the structure of Mitzrayim, we're able to transcend the structure. Creation is a new thing. God created the universe. But that we should, in our structure, be able to transcend structure, that's the great gift of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of the exodus from Egypt, Passover. So Kedoshim follows and defines what that means, that ultimately it's about, even though we're structured creatures, we have an element that's called a divine soul in us. And that divine soul allows us to transcend ourselves. That's the beauty. And that's when real beauty comes out of a human being. Can people remain within the structure and be nice people, good people? They can be beautiful people too. But ultimately, the move from you to something higher than you happens when we turn from good to sacred. That's where sanctity comes in. So goodness, as I said, goodness is great, but it ultimately will be defined by a structure. And to go back to the formula, anything that's part of a structure cannot transform or transcend that structure. Just like you can only lift yourself up that high. Another person can help lift you to another place. If you want it in psychological terms, let's put it this way. A subjective human being, which we all are, can never truly be objective, because as long as you see it from your perspective, it's still going to be subjective. Even your objectivity is somewhat subjective. It's like the doctor that says, I'll tell you when you need a second opinion. That usually elicits a laugh. Okay.
They're laughing up there.
I know. Does that mean nobody's listening, or means that it wasn't funny? Okay. One of the two. It means, in other words, that we cannot, one who's trapped by certain definitions cannot free themselves from those definitions until someone else or something else introduces that to us. What does it mean in personal terms? It means that we are all defined by a structure, there's no question about it. So where does something beyond enter into our lives? It's called that we also have a soul. And the soul is endowed with divine personality. And as divine personality enters in us, it helps us to transcend our own selves. In other words, to get yourself out of your own way. And sometimes people say, you're your own worst enemy. What does that mean? How could somebody be their own worst enemy? It means you, in your perspective, you decided this is what's right. It may be the farthest thing from what's true, but you trap yourself because you're convinced. It's called denial, it's called a trap. So Kedoshim tells us that instead of just being good, do something that's beyond what you think is good, beyond your definition of good, beyond your habit of goodness. Which explains something, and it explains it in Tanya chapter 15 if you want to look it up. It says there, based on a Talmud. The Talmud says there's a thing called Eved Elikim, servant of God, who serves. And then there's a thing called Lo Yavodeh. Someone Lo Yavodeh who's not considered to be a servant. And interesting, you'd think the Talmud is going to explain someone who's just following their own desires, their own Yetzer Hara, their own evil inclination, is the non-servant, and the servant is someone who's a good person. Now, the Talmud says the following. In the days of the Talmud, there was a custom that when you studied text in the academy, in the yeshiva, in the Beis Medrash, you reviewed that text 100 times. That was the custom. So the Talmud says like this. Somebody that studies text and reviews it 100 times is considered Lo Yavodeh, as if they did not serve. The person who goes and reviews it 101 times, that's considered a servant, someone who's serving God. Why? Because the first one, it's habit. It's a creature of habit. The habit then happened to be 100 times. Today, that's great for us. Most of us don't come close. So if we hear somebody studying something 100 times, that would be like the greatest scholar. But those days, that was the custom. That was the tradition. That was habit. Since it's habit, it's not servant. You're doing it because you're programmed that way. Everyone's doing it that way. You're a conformist. 101 shows that one time is worth more than all the 100 times before, because you went out of your orbit, out of your comfort zone. So comfort zones don't always mean bad comfort zones. You could also have a good comfort zone. This is how you do good things. Sanctity, serving, demands that element where you go beyond yourself. That's when you know that you moved from a selfish love to a selfless love. And you could see it immediately. I've counseled many, many people, couples. And you could see a moment in just a few questions, you can see right away how the love of that couple comes. Whether it comes, sometimes it's great love. I've seen great love between people, but with a few questions you discover the love is on their terms. Right now it's working, because they're both getting something out of it. But let the boat be rocked, and no relationship does not have some rocks in between, and it will be shaken up. And that's when the things will truly be tested, the real love. Ultimately, can you get out of your comfort zone, or is it part of your comfort zone? And that's what he says. It's a very powerful concept. It's to do with, in general, about all of our lives. Many of us, we are programmed creatures, so we are programmed to do certain things, and some of them are good things. Kedoshim Tiyu tells you, here's a commandment. Be sacred, don't just be good. Kedoshim, because I am sacred, God says. Become like I am, meaning go out of the human and become divine. That's when you see the ultimate love. For instance, to use an example, and I've given this example, there's a love when two people love each other, where when one of your beloved asks you to do something, even if it's inconvenient, you comply. Love. So even if it's not convenient, you do it anyway. There's a second level of love that's deeper. That even if the other person, your beloved, does not ask you, but they imply, they hint, they allude to something. So you could on one hand say, I didn't hear it, make believe like you didn't hear it, or if you love someone, you don't have to wait for them to ask you specifically. Even if they allude to it, you also do it. Obviously, that's a deeper love. But then the highest level of love is the one that comes in this context. Your beloved is not expecting it, they didn't ask for it, they didn't allude to it, completely unanticipated. You visualize, you imagine, what would my beloved enjoy? And you do it anyway. That's considered the ultimate love. Why? Because it's not expected, it's not by the script, it's not by definition. The first two, as you could say, is a form of requirement. That's part of a relationship. If someone asks you to do something, you love them. I'm not even getting whether you do it because you're going to get something in return, even if not. But the third demonstrates something that's beyond the human. You're thinking outside of the box. You're going out of your comfort zone. You're going out of even what's expected. That's when you've done something. You've changed the universe. And this is a fundamental principle in Jewish thought, and especially Hasidic thought. To do something that's a little different than what's your usual program, your usual schedule. That's why we have the concept that every year or every period in time, add something, a mitzvah, a good deed. It's not so much about just doing more things, it's about you going out of your own limits. I have found personally, as an exercise, and I've tested this, people who are trapped in some way in their lives, whatever it may be a job, bad environment, bad relationship, just your own traps of your own psychological tricks that you play on yourself. I find that sometimes you can't attack it head on. What you do is add something else in your life that's different, and it just does a shift. It's like a shift. You add something in the menu, so to speak, that's different, and in some way it spills over and starts affecting the rest of what you do. Because you see, comfort zones breed comfort zones. Basically, stagnation breeds stagnation, to put it more bluntly. And change breeds change. You don't always have to attack the enemy or the thing that's disturbing you or the trap directly, because sometimes that will be too formidable of a challenge. So you find something positive, you bring a little more light, something new. As soon as you change your comfort zone, unbelievable things happen. Because ultimately it's our own habits, for good or for bad, that are our biggest traps. And the easiest habits in a way to change, well, in a way it's not the easiest, but on one hand, you could say the easiest habits are bad habits. You know it's a bad habit, so you're motivated to change it. Something good in my life, why should I change it? I'm doing it. I'm studying every week 1 hour, let's say. Or I'm a volunteer for every hour, 1 hour a week. Why would I change that? Because in a strange way, change, as I said, breeds change. If you, instead of an hour, you do an hour or 10, or instead of a certain time that was easier for you, you do it in a little more difficult way, you'll discover that change will shifts and opens up opportunities. It's not that it's a really mathematical type of thing. You know, you're in a certain place, you seem trapped and locked, you can't do anything with your situation, so you add something new. So it has to change the equation. This is essentially the concept, especially as we come from Passover. On a practical level, Kedoshim to you, to find something that we go from the good to the sacred. Which doesn't make it less good, it just turns good into beyond human good, into something that's divine. Kedoshim. So my suggestion is, coming from Passover, if you really want Passover to have a perpetual, lasting effect, you have to do something. You have to add something new. And it's not that difficult to do. It takes, obviously, commitment. It's difficult because it's like breaking a habit, or getting beyond your habit, beyond your comfort zone. But the return is very great. So think of it, maybe you can use your selfishness to think of it as the gain will also be quite great, because you change something in the comfort zone. And this can take on many different shapes and forms. It can take on whatever it is in our lives that we're doing. We can find all kinds of different areas where we can add something like this. Can be in charity, whether it's financial or it's time or energy, or it can be new approaches to things. It's no different than when people, for example, who are artists or writers and so on, they have to change their environment. They change the scenery. And when they change the scenery, new things open up. It's like new opportunities open up. You can't always generate it from within. So sometimes you need something outside to wake it up, to get it cooking, so to speak. So the same thing is in our personal lives. As we come from Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is all about leaving our constraints, we may not be able to leave the constraints that trap us directly, but you can definitely introduce something that's beyond your comfort zone from the outside, and no doubt that it will affect even the things that are most constraining, most limiting to you. Another factor is this: the human being, by definition, because we're structured, has only that much room in your system. Think of your mind as a hard drive. So if the mind is occupied with negative thoughts, dark thoughts, shadows, and we all know that you can't think about two things at once. So if you think about negative thoughts, it's very difficult to start thinking about positive thoughts unless you push it away. So the same thing is like in a dark room. When a room is dark, how do you change the situation? You can go in and start trying to fight with the darkness. Like try push it out, maybe bring a tow truck or a battering ram, and just like try to get rid of the darkness. It's not really going to work, because darkness doesn't respond to those type of tools. You can use a vacuum cleaner, but it's not going to help. So the way to get rid of darkness is you bring in something else. So another way to get rid of something is you bring in a light. So if it's dust in the room, or if it's an object, you can vacuum it, you can sweep it, you can push it out. But if it's darkness, the only other way is to bring something new in. You bring in a little light. What happens? Automatically the darkness is dispelled. The same is true psychologically. When we're filled with particular attitudes, As I said, we can be our own worst enemy. Your attitude is what traps you most. Because part of that attitude's become ingrained in us. And it's almost like we feel we can't do more than that because I tried everything, type of thing. And I always ask this to people. I said, you tried everything? Yeah. So why are you here? Why are you coming to me? What do you want me? Maybe there's something you didn't try? No, I tried everything. So what do you want from me then? What do you want to say? Want them to just say that I didn't try everything and maybe you have something new to say. Or else why are they coming and speaking to me for that matter to anybody? You want me to just confirm that you tried everything and make you feel good that you're a great person because you tried everything and you just cursed? Is that what you want? Like confirmation that you're hopeless? You're not coming to the right person because I don't believe that. I believe that no one has tried everything because it's impossible. We can say, in my perspective, I've tried everything. All the options I thought I had, I tried. But to say all the options you tried, that's a false statement. That's impossible. And if you are not open to hear that, you almost have trapped yourself because you've decreed a self-defeating prophecy that nothing more can be done. The first step is to recognize that maybe something more can be done, which is a little humility that you don't have it all figured out. It's always the first step in any type of healing. So what the person needs when a person is occupied with thoughts like that is something new, a fresh thing to shake it up. You get a positive thought. What happens is the positive thought enters your consciousness, and then simply the negative thoughts don't have all the room. They no longer have a monopoly on you. That's like light being moved into a dark room. And that's not as difficult as it sounds. It means that you have to do something that you've not been doing till now. Something that is definitely illuminating. I know some people come to this class, just as an example, it could be this class or another class, and they tell me that they made a commitment to stick to this class. This is like a piece of light for them every week. And I know the effects that it has on a person. I know what effects it has on me. Because it becomes a commitment. And bottom line is, for some people, at least 1 hour or 2 hours in the week, they know they're dedicated to something that's positive. I'm not plugging this class per se. You can choose anything, just using it as an example. And they know that this thing is almost like an oasis. And there's no way, the fact is you only have that many hours in the day, and if you find 1 or 2 hours doing something that you know is light and different than what you've done, you automatically have weakened the stranglehold of the monopoly of the darker forces in your life. Now this sounds like so simple, but very few people really do it. Because we're trapped by our own attitudes. As I often say, people looking for change. So what are you doing to manifest that change? To generate that change? Nothing. So how do you expect change to happen when there's no catalyst? You are here. Let's say you're sitting in this chair and you want to be somewhere else. And it's not happening. What do? You stand up and you walk there. You expect you're going to sit in this seat and you're going to get over there? How are you going to get there? Because what? Someone's going to carry you? So here's the line that I use. That if you think what you thought and you say what you said and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. Right. Same thing. Where they say nothing changes, nothing changes. Now what does that mean practically speaking? If your actions and your words and your thoughts are going to stay the same, where exactly is change going to come from? So then, our the answer, just to do this hypothetical, imaginary dialogue with yourself. So the answer, the person playing devil's out will say, well, it'll come. Maybe God will do something. I'll pray. God will do something, or maybe something I'm not expecting. But even if God does something, or someone else does something, you're still thinking, speaking, and doing what you did. So there may be no room even for someone else to do anything. Like I know people, recently I've shared this here, a couple who, thank God, got married with each other. They met 10 years ago. And I remember very vividly how they both said they're not for each other. And not to say I'm no prophet to say I knew they were for each other, but I knew one thing for sure. They didn't give it the time of day to think about it. They were so busy with all kinds of mishigas, whether it was money or other distractions or many unhealthy things. There was no room to even think about it. It's like when they met each other, they were so consumed with their own thinking, they didn't even look at the other person really in the fullest sense of the word. I'm not judging them, but that's where they were. And today, what happened was they uncluttered some of their lives, so they were able to see things. They were blind, basically. It's like a fellow told me, he was in therapy, and one of the things that really got him to wake up was that they in a very intense type of weekend workshop, where they do role playing. So you tell your life to the other people, to the people who are the group, and then they play act, meaning everyone takes a role. You tell them about your brother, about your sister, about your father, about your mother, and they play act. Each one plays out what you tell them. Essentially, you give a short description, and they use their imagination. So one of them said how oppressive they feel, how oppressed they feel by their mother, the guy. So the guy playing his mother got onto his shoulders, found a way. How do you manifest oppression? He climbed onto the back of this fellow, literally, physically, onto his back. So you imagine a 200-pound guy on top of another guy, just hanging onto his throat like this, literally hanging onto him. And he's in the process of dating a girl, so someone else is playing the girl. Just as a play act. And he's trying to talk to the girl, and this guy's hanging on his back, and he keeps saying, "Can you get off my back?" And in the beginning, he thought it was a joke. He says, "Get off my back. She's oppressive, but I didn't mean you climb on my back. But what else do you think oppressive means?" And after like 5-10 minutes, he suddenly started feeling it's exactly what is going on. And he keeps telling the girl, "Give me another minute. 1 second. I just have something on my back, And the girl says, "What's the matter with you? I'm here with you on a date. I dressed up, came out, we're going." And he has no time at all for her. And then his cell phone rings, But after a few minutes, he came to realize what's going on. That's exactly what's happening. He can't even talk to the girl because he has something on his back that is so oppressive. So it had to be like a physical play acting to ultimately drive the point home. And this is very much the story of our lives. It may not be quite that way, but we have clutter that we can't identify because that's part of clutter. Clutter means it's your clutter, and you can't really see your own clutter. That's part of the trap of the structure. So you need to allow light in that either comes from an objective party that helps you see, or you bring in light into your life that just frees you. It loosens the monopoly of this stranglehold, and that allows you to perhaps look at and see things a little better. So on a practical note, my suggestion is, as we sit here the week after Pesach, coming from Pesach, Passover, experience of transcendence. So Kedoshim tells us what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be moving beyond goodness, from goodness to greatness, from human goodness to divine goodness, which simply means that it's not just on your terms, it's beyond your terms. It's not just defined by your parameters, your habits, but beyond them. Does that mean good habits aren't good? No, good habits are great and should keep going, but it means that a human being ultimately, if you don't break your habits, you become a trap of your habits. And Kedoshim Tiyu gives us the gift that Kedoshim, you have a power to become like God. And there's a medrash that I've discussed in previous years that says, Kedoshim Tiyu Kedoshim, that the medrash says that you may think that you are as holy as I am. So the Medrash says, but Kedoshani, no, I, God, am higher than you. Kedushasi l'mayla mikdushaschem. My sanctity is greater than your sanctity. And the Hasidic Rebbes interpret this the opposite way. That you may think, Kedoshani, that you are sacred as God. The answer is Kedushasi l'mayla mikdushaschem. That Kedushasi l'mayla, my sanctity above, is dependent on your sanctity below. That you create sanctity for God. We sanctify God and God's name. That means, in an interesting way, that when God created us as creatures, and creatures of habit, with a defined structure, we have two choices. Either we live up to that structure, and then we are just creatures. But if we defy that structure, we transcend the structure, and we go out of our habits, which is what a human being can do and an animal cannot. An animal will never transcend its own habits. We can. Then what you do is, you bring sanctity to God. Because till there, God was a creator. And now you've turned God into a sacred God. A God that has created something that can transcend its own structure. That demonstrates a greater dimension of godliness than just to know that God is a creator. To know God is a creator, we're the creature, and that's it. There's a subject and there's the king, has a servant. But imagine the servant becomes something that's beyond the servant. That we do something that's beyond what the structure required of us. We love more than what was expected. We dedicate ourselves more than you would have naturally done, beyond your nature, beyond your comfort zone. Then what you do is you sanctify God's name. You sanctify God means you elevate God to a higher place, which is an unbelievable thing to do. It means you turn God from a creator to something far beyond a creator of creatures. And that is the ultimate, obviously, achievement. Kedushasi l'mayla, that my kedusha, my sanctity above, kedushas comes from your sanctifying your lives below, on this earth. That's the ultimate link. So that's what, like what the Talmud says. The actions of righteous people, tzaddikim, is greater than Ma'aser Shemayim v'Aretz, than God's creating heaven and earth. How could that be? As I said before, creation is the greatest thing possible. Because to create something from nothing for God is in a place where it's beyond something, beyond nothing. He can create something. That's an achievement. But from God it's not such a great achievement. But to take from something and make it back into nothing, meaning nothing into selflessness, from the selfish, that's a great achievement. Because we're taking an existence that's structured and learning how to take the structure and create something beyond the structure. And that's to answer the question I asked before, what's beyond something and what's beyond nothing, is that place. Because when we do so, we're not obliterating or annihilating ourselves. When a person goes beyond their comfort zone or transcends their habits, it's not like you suddenly disappear. What happens is a new dimension emerges. A new dimension emerges that you can't call something, meaning the something of the ego. You can't call nothing, which would be annihilation. You become part of a divine entity that is neither something nor nothing. It means you become part of something that is beyond you and your parameters, but also does not destroy you and your parameters. And that's a very fascinating concept in itself, which I will elaborate on in the future about. Is the ultimate goal where mortality meets immortality, and where the temporary meets the eternal. Is the ability to take the universe, the material universe, and turn it into something sacred. And in turn, what then happens is you reach a place, as I said, that's beyond the finite and beyond the infinite, beyond matter, beyond spirit. It's a place of sanctity, sanctifying the universe. So the universe doesn't become less, it becomes more, precisely because you make it less ego. So with that being said, I want to bless and say, after coming from Passover, may the Passover spirit, the power of transcendence, permeate our lives, and we should create containers for that. And the simplest container is to find something where you do differently. Think different, act different, speak different. Something new. It doesn't have to be dramatic, but something that you know is out of your comfort zone. A little different, a little more, a little different than you would find comfortable. And you'll see that it's the ripple effect that it gives back to you will be far greater than your investment in it. So, with that, everyone should have a very transcendent week. A Kedoshim Dika week, a Kedusha Dika week, a sacred week. A week that transcends, at the same time permeates. In Hasidic terminology, Mamala Kalaman and Seviv Kalaman, as it's combined into the Etzem, the essence. And I want to also thank, being that it's the beginning of a year, I want to thank the people that help make this class happen every week. Velvel, Gittel, who's at the front there, and some of those that are behind the scenes from my office, and Philip and Shana and Rashi, who may or may not be listening. We'll find out, we'll test it. I'll call her and say, did you hear what I said at the end? and everyone else among you that help support financially, physically, materially, spiritually, and in all ways to the work we do. And I want to specifically for this particular class thank these classes are dedicated, and we welcome your dedications. This and last week's class as well, meaning 2 weeks ago, because last week we didn't have a class. The class before Passover, dedicated by Mark, our good friend Mark Belinsky. And this class is dedicated in honor of his mother's birthday, who happened to be she and your father were at this class, I think at least once, right? Asya Batsara, born on the 25th of Nisan. May she have many healthy years and have nachas from you, and dance at your wedding. and all of us together, and the same blessing for everybody here. I don't remember who the class was dedicated 2 weeks ago. To whom was that? Oh, it was in honor of the Rebbe's birthday, our teacher, our Rebbe. Thank you for that. And as I said, again, thank you to all of you to enhancing this experience, and may our journey continue together, and hopefully you bring some of this light to others, and it should have its own perpetual effect. As we know with light, the light you give does not diminish your own, so it only makes it more powerful. So good night, everybody. We welcome you again next Wednesday night. We shall be here. If you for some reason cannot make it, or you have friends that are not here, it is live webcast at meaningfullife.com, and which can be also seen again. In case you want to see a replay of this tonight, it's available on the internet on our website. Within a little time after the class, we'll have it up there. So good night, everybody, and we take a little break till next Wednesday. Be well.
Anybody wants to get the emails, you can put your name in front to write down the email address. We'll send you out the daily omer or the weekly emails. So please put down your name in the front.
Right.